Hello friends, my name is Dr. Vijay Bhatia and today I'm going to discuss about biology of the mental disorder. This is part 1. In the first instance, the brain is made up of nerve cells called neurons. I'm showing you in this slide a structure of a neuron. What basically is a neuron is a nerve cell in the brain. It has got dendrites which are tree-like structures which receive information from other nerve cells. It is passed on to the cell body, and the nerve cell will then ultimately decide whether to pass that information to the other end, which is called axon terminals, to communicate with the other nerve cell, saying that to either stimulate the other cell or inhibit the other cell, and can affect in different ways. The information is passed from one cell to the other. Now, in a brain, nerve cell acts like a factory because it makes chemicals. It manufactures molecules, proteins, fatty acids to repair the brain and do all the other functions of the brain. And it is not only the nerve cell, which is mainly the communicating cell. There are a number of other cells that are supporting cells or structural cells called astrocytes and others. Brain has roughly about 100 billions of nerve cells, and each nerve cell, communicates with other with hundreds of them. And in total, there might be more than 100 billion connections. And some of them are being broken, some of them are being made new, and some of them get very strengthened. Brain weighs about 1300 grams. Well, it can vary from 1200 to 1500 gram. Average is about that much, slightly lower in the females. And so that's about average. 60% of human body literally is water. And if we look at the brain and take away the water, the dry weight is made about 50% fat and only about 15 to 30% of protein. You can see the fat content is high, and we will explain that why. Because the nerve cell membrane, which is quite a big structure compared to the size of the nerve cell itself, is made up of fat. Brain cells connect and communicate with other cells. Some brain cells, like microglia, astrocytes, there are endothelial cells which are surrounding the blood vessels. There are some uh, immune cells like mast cells, and there are other cells which provide support and strength and build up the myelin sheath around the axons so that the impulses are passed on quicker and efficiently. Now, brain needs the power supply. This comes from the oxygen and the glucose. When they combine, they produce the ATP, which is the unit of the energy for any cell in the body. And obviously, there is some waste product once oxygen and glucose combines, like carbon dioxide, that needs to be taken out through the blood. And there are other radicals produced. When we say radicals, they can be like oxygen radicals, OH radicals, which are byproducts and that need to be neutralized. Otherwise, they can damage the lipid layer or cell itself. So this toxic material has to be removed and disposed of efficiently. And obviously, because nerve cell is a manufacturing number of things, it needs raw materials, and those raw materials are provided by amino acids, which are the end result of the digestion of proteins, fatty acids, which is the end product of the fats we eat, carbohydrates, and on top of that we need certain minerals, vitamins. They are part and parcel of the machinery itself for the brain nerve cells to function properly. There is transport system, because once it is made, they need to be taken away. The brain has, the nerve cell has a particular uh, structure from the cell body to the axon, which can be very long, and so it needs that transport system within the cell to provide. This is built by the nerve cell itself. It is already part of the machinery. And obviously there can be damage which needs to be repaired, which is the role of the cell itself, and we need to protect the nerve cells by having the immune cells, and there's a blood-brain barrier which stops the toxic substances going to the brain in the first instance, and very selected molecules are allowed to go into the brain. Products are produced, and these are required for cell to communicate with other cells, and inside the cell they are passed through the long axons from the cell body to the axon terminals to convey the message to the next cell, nerve cell. Other products are required to keep the stability and some maintenance, repair. If the cell wall is damaged, there has to be production of enough phospholipid bilayer to repair the cell membrane, and it needs protection inside, and also growth of the nerve cell, because the connections are being made and the connections are being strengthened. They need to be properly protected. Inputs from others, what is required and what needs to be communicated. This is the structure of a cell membrane of a nerve cell. Why I am showing this? Because it is the most important structure among others, because it forms quite a big part of the neuron, as neuron is very elongated structure, as you have seen in the first slide. And you can see that cell membrane is made up of bilayer. These are two layers of phospholipids. They are literally fat, and these phospholipids are basically omega-3 fatty acids, omega-6 fatty acids, but there are certain molecules which are made up of cholesterol. The idea of having these branched fatty acids is to give the flexibility to the cell membrane. Cell membrane, these are just the phosphate molecules attached to the fatty acids, and these are very fluid. They can be dipped down, dipped out, moved from one side to the other, and inside the cell membrane, these are the gates. These are the receptors. Literally nothing should go inside the cell. Let's say this is outside the cell, this is inside the cell. There should be nothing going in and out of the cell unless the cell requires it or cell wants to dispose it of. Who decides that? That decides the cell membrane, and the nucleus will produce those gates. These are the gates. They will produce those gates. Even glucose molecule is not allowed to enter without the permission of these gates. These gates will open only when the glucose is needed. And similarly, it applies to a number of other molecules, including water, including hydrogen, or hydrogen ions, oxygen can diffuse fairly quickly, and the reason is because they are not polar molecule, whereas water is a polar molecule. They become this phosphate component of the phospholipid layer, and they are hydrophilic. They love the water, and they will keep it this side, whereas the middle part of the bilayer is a hydrophobic. That means they don't want water. That's why they are away from water. Remember, there's a water outside, water inside, and these fatty acids chains, they want to be away from the water, and they're called hydrophobic. So literally, even the calcium, sodium, potassium, even though they are required by the cell, but they're not allowed to enter unless the gate opens for them, and sometimes they are forced to enter even if they don't want to, because the gradient is higher on this side and lower on this side. Even then, sometimes these gates uh, function in a way that they bring the nutrients that is required inside the cell from the outside, and similarly any wastes that need to be taken out. So there is a lot of structures here. We don't need to go into all of these, but they all help in identifying what should go in, what shouldn't go in. These branches, they will attach to only certain molecules, and these receptors, they will open only for certain molecules. So I'm trying to explain again here. Bilayer of phospholipids, which is the cell membrane. It's mainly made of omega-3 and omega-6 fatty acids, although there is some cholesterol and other fatty acids as well in small amount. These together, 3 and 6, make something about 50% of the cell membrane. It allows selected things to enter and leave, and oxygen and carbon dioxide is one exception. The gates will open, they are like pores, and they will allow the things to enter and go out, and nothing else. Within the nerve cell, there is a, inside the cell, there is a negative electrical potential compared to the outside. It's roughly about minus 70 millivolts, and if the electric volt decreases or increases because the hydrogen electrons or sodium ions enter the cell, they will make it slightly more positive inside, or less negative inside. That can stimulate the nerve cell. Or if it gets too many chloride ions, which are negative ions, keep on going inside, that will hyperpolarize and will stop the cell from firing or stimulating or generating the impulse. And nerve cells, they are highly specialized cells, and they produce a very specific chemicals which are highly reactive, and they interact with the next neuron. And some of these neurons, they form and sit in groups, and when they sit in groups, we sometimes call them nucleus, like nucleus accumbens, which is reward center of the brain. They produce dopamine, and they when the cell gets stimulated, from wherever the source, even from, if I see something very beautiful, I enjoy that releases dopamine in my um, nucleus accumbens, which will give the feeling of very nice feeling. As we said, dendrites receive signals, axons, to pass the information to the next one, and at the end of the axon, there are axon terminals which communicate with other neurons, and they can communicate with more than one neuron in different places. What does the nucleus of the neuron does? That is the main part of the machinery, which, if stimulated, most of this is remaining silent inside, but only part of it will become stimulated and telling the to produce the protein or produce the receptor or produce the enzyme that is required for the maintenance of the nerve cell or any cell. And the way it produces this, first it unravels DNA, and they are coiled around a special protein called histone proteins, and they uncoil and then they get stimulated to produce the nerve enzymes and transmitters. So overall functions of the neuron and the ultimately function of the brain is to produce certain chemicals that will stimulate only certain other neurons in the chain of nerve cells connecting with each other, some of them inside the brain, some of them coming out of the brain and supplying different organs like heart, lungs, liver, muscles, skin, and other parts. And they produce number of other molecules um, um, and, and to produce proteins or to maintain the cell function or repair, protect and grow. They will manufacture proteins as we already discussed, and the machinery that produces proteins is enzymes, and the DNA will produce these enzymes. However, in order to produce these, you need certain raw materials like amino acids, fatty acids, carbohydrates, and glucose, and you need some coenzymes. The coenzymes are like vitamin B12 can be a coenzyme or cofactor, which will stimulate, or the enzyme will not work until the vitamin molecule is attached there, or certain minerals like calcium, magnesium, or iron, they are required for the normal functioning of the cell. Receptors are the main gates through which everything and will pass through or not pass through. And cell parts, the neurotransmitters are the main molecules that are released at the terminal of the nerve cell, nerve axon, to communicate with the receptors of the next neuron. Obviously, there will be structural proteins and transporters. This is the synapse where actually ultimately the neurotransmitter is released and they get connected to the receptors on the other neuron. Therefore, the information from this neuron is passed to the other neuron to carry on the function, the message to the other one. Now, this is just a one receptor I've made. Even calcium, this channel will remain closed. It will only open when certain things combine here or combine there. Like in this case, glutamate has to. Now, glutamate is a neurotransmitter released by the first neuron, which will stimulate this receptor, telling the gate to open. But in the process, it also needs another protein molecule called glycine to come and attach, and they both function in a way so that the calcium can flow from, and it can only flow from one side to the other. It will, the moment it enters and there is enough requirement is over, this receptor will stop. So total brain functions is in affect the total functions of the nerve cells we discussed already. Thank you for watching. That is the end of my slides. And if you like, please subscribe the channel and please leave the comments for improvements or any other topics for discussion. Thank you very much.